A foal hits the ground and, within the hour, it's standing. Not wobbling in a corner waiting for someone to explain gravity to it. Standing. Walking. Figuring out its legs in real time while you watch, slightly amazed from the other side of a fence. 1 hour. That's all it takes. Now picture a human baby. Day 1. It cannot hold its own head up. It cannot focus its eyes past about 12 inches. It cannot roll over, grip reliably, or do anything that resembles locomotion for the better part of a year. It will need someone to carry it, feed it, and keep it alive, basically full-time, for longer than most mammals on Earth are even pregnant. And here's the thing that should bother you. This is the most dominant species the planet has ever produced. We built cities. We wrote symphonies. We sent machines to other planets. And we start life unable to hold our own head up. That's not a minor quirk. That's a genuine puzzle. Because this isn't just about foals. Wildebeest calves are running with the herd within minutes of birth. Minutes, because if they don't, they get eaten. Elephant seals, dolphins, deer. Across the animal kingdom, the rule is roughly the same. Get mobile, get fast, or get gone. Helplessness is a death sentence. Evolution does not typically reward it. And yet here we are. I did not fully believe how extreme the gap was until I looked at the actual developmental timelines. A newborn chimp, our closest living relative, sharing something like 98.7% of our DNA, can cling to its mother's fur within days. It has grip strength a human infant won't match for months. It's not just more capable, it's categorically more prepared for the world it just entered. A human baby, by comparison, arrives with a brain that is only about 28% of its eventual adult size. 28%. The lights are on, barely, and almost nothing is wired up yet. So the question isn't just, why are human babies so helpless? The real question, the one that has a genuinely strange answer, is why evolution kept this going. Why, across millions of years, did natural selection look at a species producing completely dependent, dangerously fragile newborns and decide, yes, more of that? And here's the thing I'll tell you now and explain later. The answer has something to do with why you can read these words at all, with why humans have language and culture and the ability to teach things to strangers who haven't been born yet. The helplessness wasn't the flaw in the design. But to understand why, you first have to understand what broke, or rather, what collided, somewhere deep in our evolutionary past. Two things happened to our ancestors at roughly the same time, and they did not get along. The first, we stood up. Somewhere between 3 and 4 million years ago, the human lineage committed to walking on 2 legs, fully, permanently, no going back. This was, by almost any measure, a spectacular upgrade. It freed the hands. It made long-distance travel efficient. It let early humans carry food, tools, infants. Walking upright is one of the reasons you're here. The second thing, our brains got bigger. A lot bigger. Over roughly 2 million years, the human brain nearly tripled in size, going from something roughly the volume of a large orange to something closer to a small cantaloupe, which, again, sounds like an unambiguous win. The problem is what happened when those two upgrades met. Walking upright requires a narrow pelvis. The geometry of bipedal movement, the way your hips rotate, the way your weight transfers with each step, only works if everything is tucked in and aligned just right. A wide, splayed pelvis makes you waddle. It makes you slow. Evolution, which has no patience for slow, kept trimming it down. But a bigger brain requires a bigger skull, and a bigger skull has to fit through that same, increasingly narrow birth canal. You can already see where this is going. Anthropologists call it the obstetric dilemma, the collision between a pelvis shaped for walking and a skull shaped for thinking. And it's a genuine, physical, non-metaphorical squeeze. We know this because we can measure it. The human birth canal is so precisely fitted to the newborn skull that the baby has to rotate during delivery, turning its head to navigate through in a corkscrew maneuver no other primate has to perform. That rotation was documented in detail by researchers studying skeletal anatomy across primate species throughout the 1980s and 90s. The fit is that tight. So something had to give, and what gave was time. The human body couldn't widen the exit, and it couldn't shrink the brain, so it did the only thing left.
It moved the deadline.
Human babies started arriving earlier in their development, before the skull grew too large to make it through, before the brain was anywhere close to finished. That's the trade. You get a big brain, but you don't get to keep it inside until it's done. You get born first, and your brain figures the rest out later. Which sounds like a reasonable workaround, until you realize what the brain figures it out later actually means in practice. Because the window that opens up when development moves outside the body turns out to be something evolution had never quite stumbled onto before. Here's a comparison that sounds wrong until you sit with it for a second. A human baby at birth is developmentally closer to a fetus than to a newborn of almost any other mammal. Not metaphorically, biologically. The brain isn't done. The nervous system isn't done. The sensory systems are barely online. If you lined up newborns across the mammal kingdom by how complete they are at birth, the human baby would be near the back of the line, behind animals with much smaller brains, much shorter pregnancies, much simpler lives. The biologist Adolf Portman noticed this in 1951 and gave it a name: exterogestation. The idea that human development doesn't end at birth, it relocates. The womb becomes the world. The final trimester, in a very real sense, happens outside the body. Portman calculated that if humans followed the same developmental curve as other primates, a human pregnancy should last around 21 months. Not 9, 21. We're born, by that measure, about a year early. The brain at birth is only about 28% of its adult size. By age 1, it will be closer to 72%, and almost all of that growth happens out here, in the open, exposed to everything. Which changes what out here means. Because here's the turn. A brain that finishes developing inside the womb is a brain shaped almost entirely by genetics. It arrives preloaded, fixed. A brain that finishes developing outside the womb, in a social environment, surrounded by faces and voices and patterns of behavior, is a brain that gets shaped by the world it's actually going to live in. That's not a small difference. That is the difference. Every language you've ever heard, every face you learned to read, every social cue you absorbed without anyone sitting you down to explain it, all of that got in because your brain was still building itself while you were already out in the world experiencing it. The skull closed around a mind that the environment helped write. Watch a newborn lock onto a human face. They do it within hours of birth, not because anyone taught them, but because the face recognition architecture is just barely online and immediately hungry for input. That hunger is the mechanism. The helplessness is what keeps the baby still long enough for the world to pour in. And here's what that requires, practically, on the ground, in the cold and the dark, before cities and hospitals and everything else. Someone has to keep that unfinished brain alive for months and months while it does its work. Someone, or more likely several someones. And that need, it turns out, may have changed what humans are to each other in ways that go much further than anyone expected. Picture it roughly 300,000 years ago. A small group, maybe 15, maybe 20 people, somewhere in what is now East Africa. It's dusk. Someone is carrying an infant that cannot walk, cannot cling, cannot do anything useful for its own survival. That infant needs to be held, fed, and kept warm through the night. And the person carrying it still needs to eat, still needs to move with the group, still needs to be functional tomorrow. One person cannot do this alone. Not really. Not for 2 years straight. This is the pressure that human helplessness created, and anthropologists think it may have done something to us that no other force in our evolution quite managed. It made us need each other in a specific, daily, non-optional way. Primatologist Sarah Hrdy spent decades studying this and came to a striking conclusion. Humans are what she calls cooperative breeders. Unlike most primates, where the mother does almost everything, human infants appear to have been raised by networks. Mothers, fathers, grandmothers, older siblings, and sometimes unrelated members of the group, all contributing to keeping one small, helpless creature alive. We know this isn't just a modern convenience because the biology shows the shape of it. Human grandmothers, uniquely among primates, live for decades after they stop reproducing, which only makes evolutionary sense if those post-reproductive years are being spent doing something that helps their genes survive. Keeping grandchildren alive fits that bill precisely. This is called the grandmother hypothesis, first formally proposed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes in the 1990s, and it held up remarkably well. So the helpless infant didn't just create a burden, it created a structure. Think about what that structure requires: trust, coordination, the ability to read someone else's intentions, the willingness to invest in a child that isn't biologically yours. These aren't small things. These are the foundations of social complexity. And every one of them was being exercised daily around the problem of keeping a baby alive. If this is the kind of thing that gets you, drop a like, leave a comment. It genuinely helps. Anyway, there's something quietly staggering about that. The same cognitive machinery that eventually let humans build trade networks, legal systems, and cities, the capacity for extended trust between non-kin, may have been sharpened first around a fire, passing an infant from one set of arms to another. The baby didn't just need the group. The baby, in a real sense, built the group. But the dependency didn't stop at survival, because all that time the infant spent being carried, fed, and watched over, it wasn't idle time. That helpless brain was doing something during those months and years, something no other animal's brain was doing quite the same way. Learning is not free. It costs time, and it costs a brain that's still open enough to be changed. Most animals don't have that luxury. A wildebeest calf has maybe a few hours to learn the basics before the savanna starts making decisions for it. A songbird gets one developmental window to absorb its species' song. Miss it, and the window closes permanently. Evolution, when it needs something done fast, builds animals that arrive preloaded. Instinct is cheaper than learning. It's just also inflexible. Human children are the opposite of preloaded. They arrive with almost nothing locked in, and they stay that way for an extraordinarily long time. A human child is still in a critical window for language acquisition at age 7, still building the social reasoning architecture through early adolescence. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles long-term planning and impulse control, doesn't fully mature until somewhere around age 25. That's not a bug. That's the longest developmental runway of any animal on Earth, and every year of it is a year of absorption. Watch a baby with a face, any face, yours, a stranger's, a face on a screen. They lock onto it with an intensity that feels almost rude, tracking the eyes, the mouth, the micro-expressions, cataloging everything. Researchers at the University of Washington found that babies as young as 6 months are already distinguishing the phonetic sounds of their native language from foreign ones, their brains sorting signal from noise in real time. By 12 months, the sounds they don't hear regularly start to fade from their repertoire. The world is literally writing the brain, and the brain is letting it. That's the mechanism. Helplessness is what keeps the baby still. Stillness is what allows the input. And input, sustained over years, is how you get a species that can pass accumulated knowledge across generations without any of it being encoded in DNA. No other animal does this at scale. A chimp can learn to use a tool by watching, but it cannot explain why the tool works, refine the design, teach the refinement to a stranger, and have that stranger improve it further 100 years later. Humans can. That chain, observation, language, memory, transmission, iteration, is what built everything you've ever used or lived inside. And it runs on the same engine, a brain that stayed unfinished long enough to be shaped by the people around it. But here's the thing that only becomes clear when you compare us directly to our closest relatives. Because chimps aren't that far behind us developmentally. The gap between a chimp infant and a human infant at birth is smaller than you'd expect. What happens after birth is a different story entirely. A chimpanzee infant is, by almost every measure, more impressive than a human newborn at birth. It grips. It clings to its mother's fur within days, supporting its own weight, riding along as she moves through the forest. Its eyes track. Its motor responses are faster. If you put a newborn chimp and a newborn human side by side, and researchers have in controlled developmental studies going back to the mid-20th century, the chimp looks like the one who has its life together. For the first few months, the gap between them is surprisingly narrow. Then something happens. Or rather, something doesn't happen for the chimp. Around age 3 or 4, chimpanzee cognitive development begins to plateau. Not stop entirely, but the steep upward curve flattens. The chimp has largely acquired what it's going to have: tool use, social hierarchy, some communication, excellent spatial memory. Genuinely impressive, but fixed, roughly, at a ceiling. The human child at age 4 is still just getting started. Language is exploding. Abstract reasoning is coming online. Theory of mind. The ability to model what another person knows, believes, or intends is sharpening into something that will eventually let humans deceive, cooperate, teach, and negotiate at scales no other animal approaches. By age 12, a human child has surpassed a chimpanzee in almost every cognitive domain. Not because the chimp got worse, but because the human just kept going. Honestly, I find that gap almost difficult to hold in my head. We share so much with chimps: the anatomy, the social instincts, the basic emotional repertoire, and then this one variable, the length of the open developmental window, produces outcomes that look like different planets. The key difference isn't brain size at birth, it's duration. Human brains stay plastic, literally physically changeable by experience, for longer than any other primates. Synaptic pruning. The process where the brain cuts unused connections and reinforces the ones it's actually using continues in humans well into the mid-20s. In chimps, it wraps up far earlier. The longer the window stays open, the more the environment gets to write into the architecture. And the environment humans were developing inside, that web of caregivers, voices, faces, and social information, was extraordinarily rich. Richer than anything a chimp infant experiences. Which means the human brain wasn't just open longer, it was open longer inside a more complex social world, taking in more, building more, compounding more. That compounding is the thing. Each generation doesn't start from scratch, it inherits what the last one figured out and builds further. Which brings us to the part of this story that I think is genuinely underappreciated. The part where the helplessness stops looking like a liability at all and starts looking like the whole point. Go back to that foal. On its feet within the hour, remember? There's something we assumed about that image at the start, something that seemed obvious. That the foal was the success story, that being ready at birth was the goal, the sign that evolution had done its job properly. That the human baby, lying there unable to lift its own head, was the one that drew the short straw. Flip it. A foal that can run within an hour is a foal whose brain is, in the most important sense, already finished. It arrives with its behavioral repertoire largely set. It will graze, herd, flee, reproduce. It will do these things well. It will not, in 10,000 years, build anything. It cannot accumulate knowledge across generations, cannot revise what its parents believed, cannot teach a foal it has never met something it figured out alone. It is ready, and that readiness is also a ceiling. The human baby lying helpless in someone's arms is not behind. It's open. The skull is soft at the top, literally, physically open, because the brain inside still has so far to go. That opening, the fontanelle, closes slowly over the first 2 years of life as the brain expands into the space the world is helping it fill. It's not a vulnerability, it's a design feature, the most consequential one our lineage ever stumbled into. Because what came out of that long, dependent, dangerous, expensive childhood is the only species that builds on itself across time. Language, writing, mathematics. Every tool that didn't exist and then did, because one generation handed something to the next and the next generation pushed further. The foal gets instinct. We got history. And here's the honest answer to the question we opened with. Evolution didn't make a mistake. It made a bet. It traded a fast start for an open ending, traded self-sufficiency at birth for a childhood long enough to absorb a world that keeps changing. Every human institution that has ever existed, family, school, religion, government, medicine, exists at some level because one species produced young that needed years of protection and used those years to become something that had never existed before. You were that helpless once. Completely dependent, brain unfinished, the world pouring in through every sense while someone kept you alive long enough for it to matter. That's not where the story of human weakness begins. That's where the story of human everything begins.